So good morning again, and we thank you for being with us for this, the fourth Caribbean Enterprise Risk Management Conference. After that amazing, profound introductory keynote speech by presentation by Warren Black, we now move to the focus on practice leading, the introduction of practice leading. And our facilitator, our keynote speaker in this regard, is the Chief Executive Officer for Hitachi Systems Security Incorporated, a subsidiary of the Hitachi Group. Prior to this, he was the Chief Risk Officer for Republic Financial Holdings Limited, Trinidad Tobago. He holds a Master of Business Administration from the Lord Ashcroft International School of Business, UK. He also holds a diploma and higher diploma from the Institute of Management Information Systems, Surrey, London, an executive diploma in business management from the Arthur Lord Clark Graduate School of Business, a certificate in strategic project management from the University of Florida, a project management professional accreditation from the Project Management Institute, USA. He sits on the board of Hitachi Systems Security Incorporated, Hitachi Systems Security Europe, as well as the board of the Caribbean Institute for Security and Public Safety. Let's welcome Mr. Anthony Subero.
Good morning, and all protocols observed. What I felt in my discussion today is to really touch base on the cybersecurity landscape that exists globally. Warren mentioned the fact that you have issues around globalization, the Trump phenom, the Ukraine war, all of that is shrinking the supply chain. But paradoxically, cyber actors are in fact globalized. Cyber actors are increasing the supply chain. So what you're seeing here is live attacks that is taking place across the world. Presentation. This morning when I was talking to my daughter, she said, "Dad, make sure you put on your glasses. It makes you look intelligent." So am I looking more intelligent now? Perfect. So I'd like to share the cyber threat landscape, what we're seeing. Just a bit of our company. We are a cybersecurity data privacy company. We provide services globally. I want to touch a bit on defining digital transformation. A lot of conversation has been had, and the world is moving towards digital technology, as Warren ably identified. But I think we need to understand that digital transformation is really a change management dynamic. It's how do you optimize data to bring value? And I feel it's important, based on the landscape to which we operate, it's important for us to understand what is IT security resilience and how institutions and governments need to build IT resilience as they move forward towards a digital journey. So it's important to understand who are the threat actors, who are the enemies that you're fighting against. And you'll see these terms called cyber criminals and hackers or threat actors. So the cyber criminals are individuals or teams of people who use technology to commit malicious activities on digital systems. Their intention is to monetize the activities. Threat actors are a bit wider. So when you see things like national intentions and trying to bring down particular defenses in terms of institutions as well as governments, it's more that threat actor element. And actually, what you may or may not have seen when you look at that movement of attacks, there's a high level of exchange of fire between the United States and Russia. Understanding how you manage a cyber threat landscape is also to understand how the actor works. So this is what is called the attack kill chain. So if you look at the top, it's called the reconnaissance. That is where the threat actor evaluates the environment and constantly, maybe through automated tools, try to identify certain vulnerabilities to get into your network. Once the actor identifies some type of vulnerability, he or she then determines how do we weaponize that? What type of malware is suitable to exploit those vulnerabilities? He or she delivers it, exploits the environment, and ideally want to move to that command and control center. At this point in time, the threat actor or cyber criminal has a full view of your network. He or she understands the movement of transactions. He or she can in fact identify, and I'm saying she because a lot of people forget these criminal actors are men. I can tell you have some good women in terms of attacking networks, all right? And the whole essence is observing the activity taking place in the environment. There's certain surveys that have been identified that at most times when you are attacked or you detect the attack, that particular perpetrator was in your network at minimum 180 days before. This is and I'm going to share some data with you in relation to how people are responding to the ransomware attacks. And the ransomware attacks is where basically the malware is applied to your network. Data is extracted, in some cases encrypted, and then they hold that data and then basically indicate to you have to pay some ransom to release that data. This is a huge business, folks. I don't know if you're anyone familiar with the Colonial Pipeline attack. Anyone? Just raise their hands. Okay. So the Colonial Pipeline attack is basically where solar winds, all right, came into the environment and basically instituted by a company called, or a malware attacker called Darktrace, and they came through a remote access part of the accounting system. Darktrace basically get their malware supply from a company called ReEvil, or a group of people called ReEvil. ReEvil has what you call a customer service contact number on the dark web in the event that your malware not working. That sounds like a bank, right? Okay, or any type of institution that driving customer service. So that's how they basically operated. Darktrace in the first year of 2020 generated revenue up to $60.5 million US. Okay, so it's extremely profitable. What is also encouraging the type of those type of attacks is a large percentage of clients or customers or companies or governments are actually paying the ransom. If you look at the top right, this based on this survey, and this was 3,500 companies, 39% indicated that they paid ransom over the 3-year period. This is just another statistic showing the different type of attacks and the level of cost that it incurred to different companies. This was a survey that was done by IBM. Basically, the cost of data breaches over the 2021 period. Two things came out of this very clearly. One, the monetization of these attacks are increasing. And two, the whole COVID-19 driven for the need of what we call remote workforce, driven the need to adopt digital transformation, and given the need to link with digital suppliers, basically increased surface attacks that made companies more vulnerable. All right, this is a composite of the same data, but with a different view. And the intention here is to show the increasing year-on-year growth in relation to these type of attacks. So if you look at the top right, the 180, basically this is actually customer data that was captured being sold on the dark web, and the value of that customer data is increasing because there's a high demand for customer data on the dark web. All right, So basic economics, supply and demand, driving pricing. From a Caribbean context, the Caribbean is under attack. I was explaining this to the Caribbean Association of Banks. We did a presentation last week, Wednesday, and I know bankers like numbers. I was a former banker, and I'm sure my friend from Exim Bank would support that. In relation to our incident response service, we grew 2029 compared to year 2029. Our revenue from that went up by 227% compared to 2029. So 2020 outperformed 2029. Already in our first quarter of 2021-22, we already 92% of what we made in the previous year. Okay, so it's a reality. And what we're seeing as well, based on some of the statistics, the Latin American Caribbean region contributes close to 22% of total global attacks. For the last quarter of 2021, there was reported 340 million attacks in the Caribbean and Latin region. The type of attacks are predominantly ransomware as a service, phishing, and data exfiltration. Some of the exploits that are being maximized, the number one is personnel, where basically phishing attacks prompting people to enter their credentials, and ultimately the personnel enter, or the person enters that particular credential. It allows them free reign into the network. The two major attackers is what we call groups called Hive and Sinakobi. Hive started in 2021, and they basically it's a distributed ransomware gang. They operate globally. Once they basically impact or infiltrate your network, they basically bring up a chat box, and that chat box takes you to the customer service area. And Sinakobi basically operates, once they access your malware, they negotiate within 4 days, of which you have to pay a ransom. They have a sort of agreement that they don't attack any Russian or Iranian companies. They're focusing mostly on North America and North America allies. What we're also seeing, and not necessarily in the Caribbean, is now a complexity of attacks. So not only are they going behind encrypting your data and backfiltrating it so that they can basically indicate that you have to pay ransom. In the event that you don't pay the ransom, they want to introduce what is called distributor denial of service, which is basically shutting down your network while they're negotiating with you. Folks, this is real. So in terms of the overall landscape, one of the things I want to share is that as you move towards your digital space, you're going to be increasing your surface attack areas. Organizations and government must continue to maintain robust defensive postures, lean towards new innovative solutions, but however, provide your employees with a strong case of awareness on what your specific threat vector is. An effective security operation team relies on two basic components: your ability to detect and your ability to respond, which sort of links to Warren's point about preparedness and responsiveness. But later on in my presentation, I will expand a bit in terms of how do you build that level of detection and response. All right, just by show of hands, how many of you are involved in digital transformation in your organization? How many of you use Office 365? Okay, so you're on that road, all right? So this is important. Now, just a sense of transparency, our company don't lead digital transformation, but our company part of the digital transformation teams that actually link security and business together. And what I'm also sharing with you is in 2018, just before the pandemic, we actually implemented a digital transformation initiative that actually helped us in relation to how we service our customers. So we were one of those that were pretty fortunate that when the pandemic hit us, we were prepared. But this is what we used, and I'm sharing it with you. Data transformation becomes a data and analytics leader. How do you drive your data to achieve your desired business value? How do you enhance your consumer experience? How do you foster innovation? I can tell you, even though we are IT security and data privacy company, the ability to accept change in terms of different type of technologies was not that easy. How do you leverage modern technologies? How do you upgrade your system and procedures? And how do you reskill your workforce? Just recently, I hired a data engineer and a data scientist. I never knew that existed, but that now becomes a key component in terms of how we deliver. But all this is surrounding around aligned leadership and culture for a digital future. In Warren's presentation, I want to ask a question because I know you're going to ask me some questions later on. How many of you felt that the inability to respond to some of these challenges may have been a leadership issue? All right, I will leave that there until the end of the session. As I mentioned to you, data is key. Most organizations will have data sitting in siloed environments, both structured and unstructured. And a key objective in any digital transformation is how do you consolidate this data logically to add real value to your company and your clients. This involves a sense of data management. How do you clean the data? What type of data you need to restore? What type of data you need to cull? Those are things that are critical. What data you need to drive access to? Who needs to get that data? What level of access do they require? Data governance, who controls the data? And when you get into data privacy, you have the differentiator between data controller and data processor. Each has a different requirements in relation to how that data is managed and governed. Data mobility, the power of services sits on our phones. You all agree? Yeah, the power of services into now and into the future sits on our phones. So your data now is going to leave your organization and move out. One of the things we have implemented in our monitoring system is actually alerts on the phone, right? That basically people could go in and determine the level of exposure that they have. And then data analytics, how data is driven. How do you analyze the data to ensure a couple of things, which is data residency. And if not discussed now, and I can tell you we're going to talk about it more in the fintech discussion, data ethics. How do you use that data? Because at the end of the day, you're using algorithms to represent desired outcome. So data ethics becomes a key component. Once you develop your strategy, then you build your technology around it. You know, a lot of people move towards getting the technology in and then coming out with a strategy. It doesn't look like that. That reminds me, some of you guys, well, the ladies too young to remember that. But for me, I used to struggle with math. So anytime I had math homework, I used to look at the answer in the back and work my way forward. All right. That's the same thing about buying technology and then trying to see how it retrofits with your data strategy. Your data strategy comes first. Then you have to rethink your operations and processes. You know, Warren talked about a new way of thinking. How do you imagine? That requires the same thing in terms of transformation. Improve customer experience and confidence. As you move into the digital space, particularly in a country like ours that is basically cash-based, how do you drive the comfort level around online? Wednesday, as I said, I was in the CAP conference, and talking to some of the banks in the Caribbean, they had indicated that the online services starting to drop and people starting to go back to the branches. That means a huge opportunity has been lost. You agree? Now that may not happen to other institutions, all right, because they probably are implementing more change management, more strategies to build digital confidence. But this is what I'm talking about in terms of evaluating these opportunities. Adopt new business models. You cannot operate the same way that you operated before. You have to change your overall operations. And that's the nature of digital transformation. It's disruptive. If it's not disruptive, you're not going to get any value. I want to spend a little time on data governance because I think it's important. As we talk about things like digital currency, e-payments, data governance become much more critical. You have the compliance component. How do you comply to specific legislation? And how do you comply in relation to the commitment that you give the consumer? How do you protect the data? There's a difference between data protection and data privacy. The analogy I like to give is, assume that you're walking around in your house totally naked. All right, your burglar alarm is on, your door is locked, the dog outside, but the curtain's open. You're fully protected, but you're not private. So the neighbors could see, if that was the intention, but then you're okay. But when you pull that curtain, that is what privacy set in. All right, so there's a difference when people hear about data protection and data privacy. There's a slight difference. There's an interdependency, but there's a difference in terms of intent. How do you secure hybrid cloud? A lot of people talking about cloud services as though it's new. The cloud has been around for 20 years now. Okay, it's just now the way the world is moving, it's starting to become more prominent. But you need to understand that moving data into your cloud requires the same level of security, if not even more, than when you had your server sitting in on-prem. It's just a different infrastructure. What cloud brings for you is scalability and agility. So in the past, when you have to buy servers and spend CapEx and expand and increase data storage, the cloud environment gives you that agility and scalability very quickly. And then how do you manage security? Particularly as you're moving data from on-prem to cloud, all right, which incidentally is the highest form of attack when we look at the analysis. When people indicate, and yesterday, I was talking to a customer and he basically said, Anthony, we're going through our data migration. What do I need to do? And I said, you have to prepare for that transitioning of data. That's where you're most exposed, because that's the portal of which to look into to attack. What does digital transformation mean? The reality is consumer change in patterns is becoming a reality. One of the things I share with my team, my current workforce, we have, if I count what we had about 2 weeks ago, we probably have a 72% that are millennials. All right, those of us long in the tooth, we starting to go out the door. By 2030, the world is going to face a huge impact in terms of the workforce, where close to 78 million of the workforce is just drop off of the market. That's when the baby boomer is going to be retired. So Kendra, is when you and I will be sitting down, resting our teeth at the side of our table talking. All right. So the world is changing and we have to adapt in our solutions towards that. And this is some statistics that I came out with in terms of digital trust, in terms of driving towards digital solutions. 71% of millennials, all right, online applications are essential. They believe these things are critical for their existence. 51% use their smartphones to make purchases. 60% think having at least one payment app is essential. And we're going to talk about that in terms of e-payment space and why it is taking so long for our fintech to grow in terms of Trinidad and Tobago. 91% use a smartphone to access their account, and 41% choose their financial services based on convenience it offers around security. All right, and if you do more research, the pattern will be the same. Digital currency. Are we prepared? 90 of the world regulators already starting to look at digital currency and adoption. I think they have added it in Jamaica. It was launched a week ago. All right, Jamdex. I think we have it in ECCB in terms of the cash. All right. So digital currency is in fact coming. And we need to prepare around that. How do we deal with protection? How do we deal with privacy? How do we deal in terms of digital trust? These are key components that we need to address, not only from a regulatory standpoint, but from a societal standpoint. Some of the key takeaways as we move towards our digital transformation. You need to be moving from a traditional setup, which is 9 to 5, to 24/7/365 requirement. The world requires 24/7, 365. It's high demand. Back home, I'm not back home because home is in Trinidad. Where I live in Montreal, everything is 24/7. You know, as I was sharing with somebody yesterday, I have what, $63 in my pocket, which is money I took out on the 26th of December last year. Haven't used it. Everything is e-payments. All right. Even there's a young guy, I take my car to wash, and I pay him once what they call one tap on a cell phone. All right, so it's moving. Security by design and privacy by design are key pillars towards digital trust. Legislation, and I was listening to a joint steering committee in relation to fintechs and e-payments, must be relevant and anticipatory. The technology is advancing faster than the laws. So one, you need to understand where you need to be. I need to anticipate in terms of where the technology is going. The skill force is changing. I'll share with you certain positions that exist now. You need to be prepared for that as an organization and by extension, the country. I can tell you right now, when we interacting with customers in the Caribbean, a lot of the IT and the IT security team or members are leaving and moving to other opportunities. So these are things you need to manage. Payments is a reality, all right, particularly e-payments. You need to understand the context of the value to bring with regards to ESG. How do you ensure compliance, but also leverage payments within the context of understanding consumer behavior and what added value proposition it could bring for you. Some key questions you need to ask as you go to your transformation process. And this is applicable for both public and private sector. Goal of change, determine the organizational maturity. Is the organization required and ready? Adaptability and department flexibility. As you move towards your transformation goal, the best thing to do is identify a particular area in your organization within your value chain and work with that, but also understand that department's readiness for that change. What is the urgency to complete and what's the scope of that change? How do you measure effectiveness and efficiency? The recent report from Gartner indicates over the last 3 years, 46% of companies that engage in digital transformation fail. And the main reason is they say they want to go digital, not understanding what is the business imperative to move towards that direction. So the digital technology is an enabler, but you need to understand the business context as to why you're moving in that direction. Strategy to carry out and complete digital transformation. Is there a safety plan that addresses the various stages and covers vulnerability? You're moving into unknown territory. So you need to understand each step and understand that security by design, privacy by design play key pillars in that transitional process. Are there safety protocols during data migration? Do you have the right talent to leverage this particular new domain? Post-implementation. Will work efficiency be compromised during transformation? As you go through that transformation stage, you cannot shut down your company and say, let me start to transform. And then after we completed, then I'm going to start back up my company. You're basically going to have two companies running in parallel. So you need to understand the implications that would have in keeping your customers happy and sustain the level of revenue that the shareholder expect to get. And our vendors and third-party entities included in the migration plan. What's their state of readiness? What's the quality of their security? What is their security posture? What's the standard in regards to security that they hold? And who are the third parties that support them? your security posture is as strong as that third party. Some discussions around your cybersecurity team. What new threats are being presented as a result of the changes that I'm making? Do we fully understand the impact of these threats? What is the security team's plan for these threats to minimize business disruption? Were these plans tested? One of the things that we have seen, the companies that have been able to respond very quickly to these ransomware attacks are companies that would have had some type of incident response as well as some level of data backup. So the ability to bring back services was much quicker than anticipated. And how often our incident response plan tested. So what I try to present here is an overview of digital transformation, the importance of data within that process, the importance of change management, and key questions that you need to ask from a business and a security perspective as you engage in that. So I want to go through quickly, how do you build IT resilience in your organization? I just want you to look at this chart here. How much times you've seen technology? Okay, so once, right? If you look at it on response. And the reason for that is cyber and IT resilience is not predominantly a technology risk. It's a business risk. There's a misconception that it's a technology risk. It's not. It's a business risk. And as you build in that level of resilience, you have to look at these particular components. What is the data and how do you deal with it from a regulatory perspective? What level of board knowledge is required and support? How prepared you are? Warren spoke about it. We take the same approach, preparedness, prevent, and I'll share that later on. How can you detect? And then your ability to respond. And then as you move into some more regulatory, what I call verticals, as well as even government sectors, how do you disclose? How do you report? How do you inform the general public? Understanding that any breach compromises confidence. Some of the questions we have discussions in terms of dealing with boards and one state entity is, has the board accepted responsibility to develop a cyber resilience plan? On Wednesday, again, I'll reference recent events. On Wednesday, I had the pleasure of meeting a couple of chairmen of banks. And one of them indicated over lunch, we have a zero tolerance for cyber, for threats and risk. I said, well, great, that's fantastic. So how much money do you spend on annual for security? I don't know. Okay, so how much money do you spend in terms of technology on average? And he gives a figure. And I said, Chair, respectfully, if you don't understand what your IT spend is, then how could you contextualize what your tolerance is? Because your tolerance by virtue is on paper, right? Is a cybersecurity budget sufficient based on business objectives? What's the organization risk exposure? What constitutes a breach and what that means from a stakeholder standpoint? From a CEO perspective, how much time should a CEO be involved in an organization's cybersecurity without taking time? The fact is the CEO and the CISO, and this is a very critical position that we have been advocating, all right, must work together in terms of improving the cybersecurity posture. The CEO has to lead the conversation on the importance of cyber resilience. And I gave a couple of examples of Liberty Mutual and Red Bull, where basically they come out indicating what is important in relation to protecting their assets and their people. A related CEO imperative, empowering your CISO or a similar type of role to carry out cybersecurity missions and objectives is critically important. And just for everyone, CISO means Chief Information Security Officer. That role bridges the issue around IT security and link it to business imperatives and objectives. All right, don't want to spend too much time on this, but this is basically talking about companies that are moving towards digital transformation. The blue is what you call digital leaders, and the red is followers. And the takeaway from that, based on all the companies that were in fact interviewed, every them talk about data security as critical on number one risk. As you move towards developing your resilience, you have to understand what our threat landscape looks like. I shared with you briefly what the threat actors are. You have to look at the intent and the motive. The intention to disrupt, to leverage data, or to just monetize. Who are the attackers? Are they going to use automated systems? Are they insiders? All right. We had an opportunity to meet with some reinsurers again on Wednesday. And what they're saying, they're seeing a high increase of collaboration with the attackers as well as inside staff. Not in the Caribbean yet. All right. Criminal organizations and those that are very targeted. Attack trends. They're going to use internal metrics, how you analyze the industry statistics. How do you threat intel, all right, to drive your understanding of your threat vector. Your risk reduction strategy is going to be driven by a number of things, constraints, issue about threat research and clarity of what the threat vectors are, understanding defense in depth. Some of you may have heard of what you call the zero trust framework. How do you segment and protect your data? Security providers, are they specialized and mature? All right, I mean, we have been around for 20 years and you have some pretty good security providers outside there. So I'm not sitting here and saying that we're not, but certain things you have to look at. The length of time they're in the business, the level of personnel, the level of security that they have relevant to your environment, and as well as the level of advisory and liability insurance coverage that they also have. All right, in the event that you were misinformed or disinformed, what type of coverage you can use to protect yourself. This is very, very similar to what Warren was talking about. Remember that preparedness and responsiveness? This is the approach that we take as well. How do we predict? So I would use this term, imagine. How do you imagine if you were under attack? What systems, if they were attacked, and what the impact would have to your organization? You basically anticipating the threat. That drives you to the prevent element, because once you understand what the type of attack will be and where it will attack, it would allow you to apply what we call preventative controls. If you have not, in your various institutions, made a decision of whether you will pay or not to pay, do that now. Go to your board or your state entities and say, boss, if I want to attack, what is the organization policy around that? Because that's going to drive the actions needed on the prevent side. I can happily report that all the work we have done in the Caribbean, no Caribbean entity has paid any ransom. All right, but that's not my call to make. I just given you that as some insider information. Once you move into that prevent, it's the detect component. How do you detect the incident? How do you understand the topology of how it's working? How do you prioritize incident or compromise? Because each incident may not have the same level of risk. And how do you contain it once you have identified it? Okay. And then last but not least, how do you respond? And that is where now you're kicking your incident response plan. You're kicking your communication plan. Very, very critical for service providers, especially for general public. You need to show control. You need to show transparency in your communication, but you have to show control, and that's critical. Now, if you look at this chart, do you think this has anything to do with cybersecurity resilience? Okay. It will look like something purely from a business perspective, correct? But that's exactly what we go through when we analyze any cybersecurity resilience. We do something called a cybersecurity posture assessment. Technology is number 4 in our analysis. We look at your mission. We look at the approach, your risk appetite, how cyber risk and IT risk fits into enterprise risk management framework. What is the governance policy? What's the board approach to risk? And then technology comes later down. One of the things as you start to move towards your resilience program is you have to evaluate its effectiveness. All right, you know, they will say nothing measured is improved. You have to determine what is your level of cybersecurity or IT resilience maturity based on your business objectives. We recommend using the what you call the capability maturity model. Basically, it ranks your maturity level from 1 to 5, 1 the lowest, 5 the highest. And you have to decide in terms of your analysis, what level is applicable to your organization or state entity. Because managing risk is a business decision. How do you balance risk and reward? How do you balance risk and controls in relation to customer service? There's a conversation I always share with when I meet with customers, and the first thing they'll ask you is, now that you finished the work, are we fully secured? And my response will be, no, but you're better prepared. Because there are too many variables and complexities for me to sit down and tell any company that you're fully secured. The analogy I like to give to bankers is like you committing to grow your loan portfolio and say for 3 years, you're not going to have any bad loans. It's not going to happen. As you move towards building your cyber and IT resilience, you have to look at infrastructure, talent, services, and vendor. Coming out of the IBM analysis of cost of data breaches, in terms of what was reported on that sample set, the average cost of exposures to vendors was $4.3 million US. All right. What's the benefit as you build that level of resilience? Efficiency of process, increase consumer trust, mitigate cyber attacks, and reduce some ransomware, and avoid and minimize costs associated with threat landscapes. We put together some of the changes that we're seeing in terms of the cybersecurity space. The whole idea of skill set is going to be changed. The whole, and Warren mentioned that before. How do you retool and reskill to the emerging? He talks about the cyber revolution, all right? That is going to happen. So we as leaders of our various institutions have to understand these dynamics and be prepared for it. I just want to run through these quick slides, and basically one of the things that when we're looking at companies that build in IT resilience and cyber resilience, there's always a conversation of what that cost would be. It's difficult to make a cost up front unless you understand where you are and where you intend to be as an organization. But these are some of the points and guidance we want to give you. What are the top enterprise business unit priorities across the next 12 to 18 months? This will drive your cybersecurity program. How has the business environment changed over the course of the last year, and what are the implications related to cybersecurity? What are the key business projects that the cybersecurity budget should support in the next 3 years? Business projects. What are some of the assumptions that we have to make as we develop the program? Again, it's around data centricity. It links to digital trust and consumer behavior, regulatory, financial, competition. All those drive your IT resilience and cybersecurity resilience. How much we should spend? As I said before, key question. Every time we have an engagement, you know, I'll just say, you know, Subero, this thing can cost us plenty. Yeah? We are to manage this. And we will manage it, but it all depends on where you are and where you need to be as an organization. All industries, the top consequence of digital complexity, based on the feedback we have gotten from CEOs, they're concerned about financial losses. So what does that mean to a CEO? What does that mean to the board? There's also the reputational impact of if you were hit. And those of companies that are highly regulated, there's the implication of potential fines. the inability to innovate as quickly as the market opportunities offer. As you drive innovation and technology, you have to build cybersecurity controls, lack of operational resilience, and how it will impact your organizational brand. These are all business concerns. This has nothing to do with technology. By the way, the presentation is we created a landing page. Ken and the team will send it out to you guys. We provided some templates. We provided what we call a ROI spreadsheet that you can use in terms of driving a digital technology. So you're gonna have all this available to you guys, right? This is just an example of how you wanna start to create your IT resilience or cyber resilience project. If you look at the top left, what are you seeing? Business objectives. What are you trying to achieve? And then the technology in cybersecurity comes into play. Conversely, you also need to track how you're investing. It's important. The board needs to see a correlation of investment as well as maturity improvement. Identify some key benchmarks, evaluate how you progress. Earlier on, I mentioned the capability maturity model, but you need to determine, okay, how am I moving in terms of improvement? Where do I sit with existing peers and understand the comparative? The only thing I always question or guide, when you're doing peer benchmarks and assessment, just remember you have to compare apples with apples and not carrots with grapes. It's two different things. Your level of maturity is maybe different from that particular entity. All right, so I'm going to wrap up now and try to bring everything together. The threat landscape is evolving faster than the mainstream technology. The same artificial intelligence and machine learning that we are trying to adopt in our digital transformation stage is the same tools that the threat actors using. The only difference is their time to market is shorter than ours. All right, so they're leveraging it much faster than we are. In fact, if you were to use Dr. Taleb, who wrote Anti-Fragile, think of the cyber criminals as the anti-fragile preying on the fragile. They are advancing the approach and complexity. Digital transformation is not an option, but a necessity, and because the world is shifting towards a digital landscape, but digital trust becomes the currency of that effectiveness. Prioritize your investment. Make both technology and IT security risk part of your enterprise risk management framework. It goes hand in hand. Build the level of risk intelligence as it relates to cyber threats. Data is currency. All right. I mean, I know that people basically digging holes and coming through branches these days, but at the end of the day, data is the commodity that basically going to be monetized. Security impacts every level of the organization. CEO, boards, state entities need to commit to cybersecurity initiatives and to communicate effectively. Security awareness is key. We did a quick survey based on some of the attacks, and 80% of those attacks could have been avoided if staff were more aware. I mean, we run a lot of phishing campaigns for customers. And I mean, Stephen Nibag there is my VP of the Caribbean. And when I get a chance to see these reports, and it upsets me when it's the same person staring at that same report that clicking on a link. All right, so it says that the whole idea of security awareness is lacking. But more importantly, there is no accountability for the person that clicked on that same link 3 times or 4 times. All right, and the cost and return of cybersecurity can be measured. All right, and I always basically keep it simple, which is basically if you were attacked now and it impacted your main system, what is the overall value it will have for you if you were down by 3 days? How do you quantify and qualify that? Just do that. And that gives you a fair indication of where and how you need to invest. So I thank you. Merci beaucoup. Bon chance from Montreal. And I'm open for some questions.
So, Mr. Subero, let me put you on the spot. What's the state of readiness for the institutions in Trinidad and Tobago as it relates to not being cyber attacked?
So Ken, you know, I have to be very, very careful how I respond to that, right? Because some of these are customers of ours. I think there need to be, so there's a yin and yang to this, and I believe there is an improvement. I'm seeing an understanding of where it needs to go. I'm seeing an understanding of the need for cybersecurity. I think what we want to see is a shift in thinking in that cybersecurity is not an IT risk, it's a business risk. And I think if institutions adopt that mindset and then understand that it needs to happen. The other element is there's a difference between the public sector and the private sector. I think the private sector firmly understands where it needs to go. I think the public sector understands, but the issue of execution is a challenge. And a lot of that has to do not necessarily a lack of will, but lack of resources. Okay. You'll hi.
Hi, good morning. My name is Sasha Dabo. I'm from Udicott. You had a slide with some boxes, and the top left, you said the one where you had the question about where does the word technology appear?
Right.
The first box, I'm an attorney.
Yeah.
The first box had to do with the legislative framework.
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to know whether there's an active discussion or information being fed to drive policy that would drive legislation, because you also indicated that we are far behind in terms of the legislative framework and preparedness.
Yeah.
Is there something happening? Is there a conversation that is receiving all this valuable, scary information to drive policy, to drive legislation, and making sure we can bounce forward?
Yeah, thank you. So in the landing page, we pulled together a high level of where data privacy is moving across the Caribbean region, and by extension, there's a mix. Again, I always use the term yin and yang. Some Caribbean countries are more advanced than Trinidad and Tobago, right? Jamaica, the CCB, Barbados is looking at it more aggressively. So it's a combination. I think what bothers me is that data privacy has been a conversation that has been around for some time. The whole conversation in relation to coming out on the next side of this pandemic, and Senator Richards would know of this very well, in terms of that whole road to recovery speaks of ICT and the movement towards digital transformation. The conversation around fintech talks about defining a digital society and a digital economy. But that's a conversation that has been going on for a while, right? So the key question is, why legislation is not happening? Why the conversation in terms of stakeholder engagement is not effectively moving forward? But other countries are doing it. Other Caribbean islands are doing it. So there's a mixed bag. Some countries are advancing into the process. I mean, Jamaica is huge. We get some business there around data privacy, but certain islands are behind. Okay, thank you very much.